All right, we're doing it. We're finally doing it. A House Divided podcast with Reese Herrmann, the debut episode. It's finally here. Why am I doing it? I can't tell you. Today is July 17th, 2020. It's a Friday. Got off work, four and a half hours ago? Feeling pretty good right now. Anyway, I've been getting a little frustrated lately. Actually, I've been getting quite frustrated lately because it seems the only thing anybody can ever talk about is Trump, coronavirus, and racism. So I decided I'd do a podcast today. I'm going to talk about the issues that are still ongoing, issues that everybody still knows about, and everybody still's got opinions about, but they're just not on the news as of right now. So we're going to start with the economy. Now, when people talk about fixing the economy, because our economy has been stagnating relative to how it was in the past and relative to economies of developing countries and China. I leaned into the mic to say China. I'm turning into Donald Trump. China, okay, let me tell you, okay, China's economy, they're eating our lunch. I don't know why I'm doing this. The first step to fixing the U.S. economy, taken by Republicans and Democrats, has always, or in recent years, has always been what gets them the most votes. It's not what actually needs to be done to fix the economy. So Democrats, it's spend, 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 and Republicans, it's lower taxes, lower taxes, lower taxes. Now, I am on board with lowering taxes because I understand lowering taxes is good for an economy. That being said, it might not be the best option when we have a deficit of almost $1 trillion, right? Almost $1 trillion every year we spend more than we're making in taxes. The U.S., the federal government, right? Republicans used to care about that. Republicans used to talk about the deficit. They used to talk about the fiscal cliff all the time. And it seems like they have dried up on it. They have just gone silent on the debt. $22 trillion in debt. We spend I think it was in 2019, $374 billion just paying off interest on the debt. This is unacceptable, and we can't go on like this if we want our country to make it into the future, unless we're going to declare bankruptcy and default on our loans, which would destroy the world economy, which we should definitely not do. So what we have to do is we have to balance the budget. Even not balance the budget necessarily, but at least lower the debt so that our GDP can increase more than our deficit, or more than our debt. Lower the deficit so that our GDP can increase more than the debt. Look at me, I'm stumbling over my words. Beautiful first podcast. So how do we balance the budget? What do we have to cut? How can we find new sources of revenue? Well, new sources of revenue, I mean, it ultimately means new taxes, right? New taxes. It's revenue for the government, not revenue for the country. Revenue for the country, if you wanted to boost it, it would be more business, right? I mean, more financial transactions going on that ultimately get taxed and go to the government. But we're trying to increase government revenue. So people are often, complaining about how the rich aren't paying their fair share. But me, being somebody who pays attention to this stuff, knows that, well, the top marginal tax rate in the United States is 37%, and that's after it was just lowered. That's on top of payroll taxes and corporate taxes and billion other taxes that people got to pay, sales taxes. What I would say, if you're trying to raise more revenue, is we should introduce a VAT tax to supplement, keyword there, supplement, a lowering of taxes across the board. That means a lowering of capital gains, income, corporate taxes, whatever we can afford, however much we can afford to lower other methods of taxation, by implementing a VAT tax, whatever it pays for. Because a VAT tax is just a more effective way to tax people. Because it essentially ensures that those who are rich enough to pay tax lawyers to weasel them out of paying income taxes actually get taxed in some way or another. So that's the only revenue raising option I got for you. Otherwise, what you got to do is you just got to stop spending. There's Hauser's Law. No matter how much we up the top tax rate, the government ain't going to get much more money than it's already getting. It's just not going to happen. You can say, the rich aren't paying their fair share. Well, here's the thing. If your only answer to get them to pay their fair share is to up the top marginal tax rate, then you're playing one-dimensional chess, man. You're playing one-dimensional chess. You are not looking at the problem the right way. And that I'm talking to you, Bernie Sanders, or other socialists out there. I don't know why I got to single out Bernie Sanders. He's just the one who annoys me the most. And Cortez. Okay, all of them. Okay, they all piss me off. Anyway, moving on. Where does the money go? Well, the three Democrats will often try to imply that the military is our greatest money pit by showing you a graph of discretionary spending. If somebody shows you a graph of discretionary spending and says, "Hey, look at how much we're spending on the military," then to debate them would be impossible, because you'd have to start by actually educating them on how the federal government works. But of total spending, we spend almost $700 billion on the military, approximately $1 trillion on medical, that's Medicare and Medicaid combined, and approximately $1 trillion on Social Security. Then about $300-something billion on general welfare. I don't know how much of that lumps into Social Security, so that's why I'm not going to use it as a metric, and about $374 billion on interest. This is based off, these are not all of them, but these are ballpark numbers based off of the 2019 federal budget that I don't have here right in front of me, surprisingly. These are just numbers that I've put into my brain because I'm a weirdo. So ultimately, you're going to need to cut something. Now, we could do away with the military entirely, and we would still have a deficit in the hundreds of billions, right? So when Democrats say, "Oh, we'll pay for this by cutting the military," that's just a lie. You are not going to be able to balance the budget without cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. You're not going to be able to do it. Ultimately, you need to get rid of these money pits. Now, cutting Social Security, that's extremely hard to do, because Social Security is popular, particularly among Republicans, because it's more old people, but it's really hard to cut Social Security because these are promises that have already been made to people. My proposal for balancing the federal budget involves moving payroll and entitlements to the state level and letting each state decide whether it wants to raise payroll taxes to pay for these things, which is not a good option, right? Or if it wants to cut benefits that have been promised to people to pay for these programs, which is also not a good option. Ultimately, there's no good option here. But payroll generates. Let me actually pull up the 2019 budget. Payroll taxes here. Now I have it in front of me. That was quick, right? I'm impressed with myself too. Nobody's impressed with me. Payroll taxes generate $1.2 trillion, or in 2019, they generated $1.2 trillion for the federal government. Now, entitlement programs, being Social Security and Medicare, the ones that you see on your payroll, on your, what's the word I'm looking for? Stubs. On your stubs. There we go. Social Security and Medicare cost $1 trillion for Social Security and then $644 billion for Medicare, meaning that in 2019, and this is generally a trend because these are mandatory spending, we don't vote on them every year, but in 2019, we lost $444 billion because of entitlements, because the taxes that we take out in order to pay for these things are not generating enough money. So what do? Well, we can't have this money pit. We cannot have this money pit. The federal government can't just keep this money pit because it's scared to lose votes. What it needs to do is it either needs to transition them to the states so that each individual state can make a decision, or it just outright needs to cut. The reason I say transition to states is because states could probably raise payroll taxes and actually generate enough revenue to pay for these programs. If the federal government raises payroll taxes, there's a good chance that it's not actually going to get a whole lot more money because of Hauser's Law. Because ultimately the federal government can only take in something amounting 20% of GDP. Right now it's at 16.3%. We could probably get a little bit more, which would be very helpful. But we still couldn't get enough more in raising taxes. We couldn't get enough more revenue to actually fix the deficit. So we either need to cut Social Security and Medicare entitlements, or we need to transition them to the states so that the states can make the tough decision, which might be a good idea, so that people in New York, who are definitely going to go with raising taxes to pay for it, can go ahead and do that. And people in Texas, who are definitely going to, well, I don't actually know about Texas, but not these days. People in red states who are probably going to go with cutting benefits can go with cutting benefits. And ultimately, federalism can be the deciding factor in how we fix it. But that would net us, the federal government, I say us referring to way too many things, so it might get confusing. That would net the federal government $444 billion more dollars a year. And it seems like a cop-out just giving it to states, but ultimately it's not. It's the best option. It is the best option to transfer payroll and entitlements to the states so that they can make their decision to fix this problem that was ultimately caused by FDR. But, it was caused by, almost a century of reckless spending by the government. Anyway, so that's a $444 billion we could save by getting rid of getting payroll and entitlements out of the federal government. That still leaves us with a massive deficit, right? That still leaves us with a massive deficit of still about what's that? Let me do the math. Yeah, about that cuts it in half, right? Approximately. We got a $900 billion deficit, about 450 is cut. We still got a $450 billion deficit. That's still unbelievably high. So we need to cut another $450 billion. Well, one thing we could do, if we're talking very long term, is once we've cut other things and we balance the budget, there's $375 billion tacked off of the annual federal expenses because we don't pay interest on the debt anymore. But that's a real long term, if we could ever get out of debt, which we'll never do. So we're going to need to cut something else, all right. Cutting defense would be a horrible idea. Now, I'm not saying we should be raising it right now, considering how big the deficit is, but cutting defense would be a bad idea. Simply because the world is unstable without the U.S. spending an insane amount of money on defense. That's just a fact. The reason that NATO countries can continue to spend less than they're obligated with their membership in NATO to spend is because the U.S. spends so much. Europe is able to afford, quote unquote afford, to do all these lefty programs because America is covering their military budget. Honestly, I don't personally have a problem with that. I don't have a problem being part of the country that is essentially top dog in the Western world. I think we should embrace that and not cut the military. Now, if we could find little places to cut spending in the military without reducing combat effectiveness, I'm okay with that. If we want to negotiate new deals with our missile company or whoever we're buying our guns from, I think we're switching from the M4 to a Sig Sauer. I don't even know why I brought that up. I just think it's kind of interesting. I don't know anything about what gun we're switching to or aren't switching to. I just like it because I have an AR-15 and M4s are fun to me. And whatever the next gun is, I want that one too. I am digressing so much. This is a perfect first podcast. I am so happy with how this is going. Just digression after digression after digression. Another thing we could do to help with the insane deficit is if we replaced welfare and Medicaid, right? So welfare and Medicaid combined costs us about, let me pull up the numbers I got. Welfare we spend about $364 billion, and Medicaid we spend about $409 billion. Now, if we replace those with a negative income tax, being the government essentially splits the difference between zero and a certain level of income, depending on the level of income we choose to begin subsidizing, what level of income we choose to close the gap to, we could actually save a lot of money. So the numbers that I like to use is a 50% subsidy up to $24,000 a year of income for an individual. I'm going to make a video about this pretty soon showing how I got the numbers that I got. But if you were to split the difference between 0 and 24,000, or between any level of income and 24,000, up to 24,000, which is the idea of a negative income tax, it would cost annually up to $644 billion. A lot of money right there. $644 billion is an expensive program, but when you consider that we're spending $364 billion on welfare, $409 billion on Medicaid, if we replace both of those programs, that's all welfare benefits, by the way. We don't have a single policy called welfare, but we have lots of different benefits which ultimately are welfare. If we replaced all those benefits with a negative income tax, we would be saving $128 billion a year. And we would virtually be eliminating abject poverty in the United States. I mean, it's a guaranteed minimum income, and I understand that it has a negative effect on incentives. If you can get by doing nothing, which you'd only, having no job, the max you'd be able to make with a negative income tax would be $1,000 a month, which is much less than welfare currently provides. But the idea is that there are no welfare cliffs with a negative income tax. There is no amount of money you can make where you would be making less if you got a better job with the negative income tax, because the amount you get from the government varies directly with the amount of money on your tax returns. Amount of money you've made on your tax returns. Unlike welfare, where I think it is a single mother could make $29,000 a year, meaning, what's that? Almost $15 an hour working full time, and would actually end up better off than if she made up to $60,000 a year, not getting any benefits, because of the amount of welfare programs stack up. And again, in my video I'm going to make on the negative income tax, I'm going to talk a lot about this stuff, and I have lots of graphs ready for you guys. But right now I'm just rambling to a microphone, because that's what a podcast is. Got to lower taxes to fix the economy. Now, I don't think we should lower taxes until we got the budget balance. Oh, and that, by the way, none of that would even balance the budget. But if we could save $450 billion a year by cutting entitlements or sending them to the states — I shouldn't say cutting them, because you're not getting rid of them, you're just transitioning them, pushing the problem to someone who can deal with it better than the federal government, because the federal government sucks. We would save $450 billion with entitlement reform and $128 billion replacing welfare and Medicaid with a negative income tax. And what's that? 450, 550, 60, 70. Let's just say 500. That'd be about $580 billion we'd be cutting from our $900 billion deficit. And what's that? $320 billion deficit? That's what it leaves us with? Well, $320 billion deficit is not good. That's still an insanely high deficit. That's something our GDP growth can almost keep up with. So perhaps if we are able to surge the economy with technology and just with the future, man. I mean, come on. The economy is clearly going to boom again pretty soon once we make our next big technological breakthrough. I mean, it's going to come naturally with new breakthroughs in energy and communication and transportation. It's coming. Another big boom is coming. Perhaps the GDP could grow to a point where our debt as a percentage of GDP will go down if we could pass those reforms. Either way, we're still going to have to make cuts. And ultimately, the amount of money we're given to people, being the poor, being the rich, being anybody, the amount of money we're giving to people is going to have to go down. That's the only way the country can survive. That's the only way the country can survive. We have to make cuts. As unfortunate as it is. Also, just going to briefly mention, maybe the rich people would actually be paying their taxes if the tax code wasn't 70,000 pages. Perhaps a 20-page tax code would be fine. I feel like that could cover it. Even 300 pages, man. Even a book. You could cover everything in a book. It doesn't need to be 70,000 pages. Clearly that's corruption. In my mind, if a bill, any bill, I know the tax code wasn't just one bill, but if any bill is so long that you couldn't read it in a year reasonably, it's because of corruption. Clearly people are throwing crap in there for their donors, right? That's how bribery works in America. I mean, that's how under the table backroom bribery works in America. Anyway, I don't know. I've exhausted myself on the economy. I'm done talking about it. I'm done. I'm sick of it. I'm bored. I'm talking about college. I didn't go to college. I took college courses. I was enrolled in a couple of colleges, but I never went to college. It was all just being a smart high schooler. I'm not in college now. I work full time. I'm a young man. Now, why didn't I go to college? Truth be told, it kind of seems like a jip. It kind of seems like a scam. The whole thing seems like a scam. It's insanely expensive, and you don't really learn anything you couldn't learn on your own. I'm not saying trust everything you see on the internet, but the internet has all the information you could possibly get in a college. Now, where did universities start? Most universities historically were based at libraries, right? Because that's where there was vast excesses of knowledge. The Great Library of Alexandria was a university, essentially, right? But now that knowledge is in the knowledge that was normally only contained in libraries, in universities, in centralized locations, is found in everybody's pocket. So it seems to me like the university system in general is a little outdated. Now I understand why a medical professional would want to go to frickin' college, right? I understand why someone in STEM would want to have the hands-on experience that a college offers. But even still, it doesn't make sense why someone going into a STEM field would have to take, general courses on English and on chemistry. It just doesn't make sense. They want them to be well-rounded is what they say. They say well-rounded. What it sounds like to me is they want them to spend more money. They want them to spend more time at the college. You got to take all of these classes because that's the only way you're going to get a degree. And then the government says, oh, well, we're totally on board with that. That makes sense. When really the government is likely being paid off by these colleges to ensure that they'll give money to colleges only if they offer programs which include lots of generals, because then people will have to spend more time at the college, pay the college more money. The college has more money to pay the government to make sure that they have to get a degree with lots of... What am I talking about? Why am I doing this? I'm clearly not... No, I'm just kidding. I swear I know what I'm talking about. I just like to get distracted. So a CNBC article written in 2017 by Emmy Martin. I'd like to paraphrase a little part of it. In the 1987-1988 school year, college tuition costs an average of $3,100 if you were to adjust for 2017 dollars, so adjust for inflation. About $3,100 for a year of schooling. 2017, a year of schooling in 2017 dollars, obviously, because this was written in 2017. The 2017-2018 school year tuition costed an average of $9,900, 213% increase since the 70s. 213% increase. Now, I'm sure that college has probably gotten better, but has it gotten 213% better? Long answer? Why did I say long answer first? Short answer, no. Long answer, fuck no. There we go. How about that one? If anything, colleges have become more redundant than they were. Because in the 80s, there was early versions of computers, right? I wasn't alive in the 80s. I don't freaking know. But there wasn't this vast access to the internet, all the information in the world in the palm of your hand in your pocket at all times. So why has college become so much more expensive? Well, it's because the government has started guaranteeing loans. Not just started, but it has ramped up the guaranteeing of loans. And what that does is that increases demand. Now, in the short run, increasing demand can lead to a larger quantity of goods ultimately going to the public, right? Increasing demand being giving people more money to go to college increases the demand for college, right? But in a long run, aggregate supply curve, right? Increasing demand drives up prices. And that can be explained by essentially if the government says we'll pay anything, then the college will think, okay, well then we can charge anything. And that's why loan forgiveness is such a bad idea. I mean, loan guarantees and loan forgiveness is a bad idea. I understand you're trying to get people an education, and I understand that the government wants to do something, it wants to do something in order to get people an education, but what ends up happening is those people who don't get these government benefits end up screwed. And even the people who do get it, the government benefits end up screwed because they guarantee a loan for a college that would have otherwise been extraordinarily cheaper had they not guaranteed the loan to begin with. And then these college students come out of college in insane amounts of debt with degrees in subjects that they can't get a high-paying job in, and they just end up screwed and angry. And they vote for Democrats because Democrats say, we'll forgive your loans. All right, they're going to forgive the loans. Then colleges will say, hey, look at that. We charged them this much and they forgave the loans. Why don't we charge them this much, as they have historically? And the price of college in the next 30 years will probably go up another 213%. Or maybe more. Or maybe less. Maybe we'll come to our senses and realize that college isn't the only option. And maybe we'll get rid of requiring generals, right? Another thing we could do to fix the university system would be, encourage pre-employment litmus testing at interviews. Encourage, rather than just looking at someone's degree, saying, okay, you got a degree generally based around this job, therefore you have this job. You could say, okay, well, demonstrate your knowledge on what we do here. And I think that a lot of places do that, and it's becoming more and more popular. But I think that should take precedence over a degree. Honestly, I think that hiring should have a smart employer wouldn't have any wouldn't even include a degree in the hiring process. They'd just say, what do you know? What can you do? What can you bring to the table? But ultimately, I mean, there is not just the culture surrounding it, but I'm sure there's a certain level of government involvement in the hiring process. There's a certain level of colleges getting involved in STEM fields and non-STEM fields. But in the end, if employment was based more on your knowledge and your skill rather than how much money your parents have, right? How much money your parents had to throw at a college for you, then the necessity of college would go down. People would become more self-educated. They'd go through alternative means. They'd go to of getting these educations that would otherwise only be provided in college. and they would, maybe go to a trade school. But ultimately, the solution to the education problem is just embrace the internet, man. Just embrace the internet. Figure out how to do the internet right, how to get information from credible sources. Just internet, man. Internet's the answer. It's always technology. It's always technology. Final subject I'm going to touch on, just a quick touch on it, is healthcare. Because you can touch on healthcare quickly and solve the problem, clearly. What are all these politicians having debates about? I just touched on the subject and I fixed it. If you don't get it, I'm being sarcastic. It's not funny, but it's sarcastic. I mean, ultimately, sarcasm is supposed to be funny. See, I keep getting sidetracked. I don't even know what I'm doing here. This is why I need a guest. This is why I need a co-host. Because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. How do we fix healthcare? It's expensive. It's really expensive. And we spend a lot of money on it. The government spends so much money on healthcare. And yet there's still so many people who can't afford to get care. It doesn't even make sense to me. Now, what we shouldn't do is go right for a universal system. What we also shouldn't do is immediately cut all healthcare benefits to people who rely on them. I'd say step one, audit the FDA. Okay, step one is audit the FDA. Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health had an article on the cost of drugs in America, and something that they cited is that the average cost of developing a new drug is between $2 and $3 billion. Now, a large chunk of that is getting it through the FDA. A huge chunk of that is getting it through the FDA. That's because the FDA is essentially pay to play. The FDA is pay to play. That's my new rap song. That's my new album. The FDA is pay to play with Reese money. Hell yeah. What am I doing? But $2 to $3 billion to develop a new drug. That doesn't need to be the case. People should be allowed to put generics on the market, and the FDA doesn't allow that because they're getting paid off by big companies. Milan? The EpiPen guys are a prime example of this. Epinephrine is not an expensive drug, and auto-injectors are not an expensive thing to make, but they have patents on auto-injectors and essentially a monopoly on the epinephrine market. Not an entire monopoly. I know you can still get epinephrine in a syringe, but they have such a stranglehold on the market for emergency allergy medication that they're able to charge $600 for a 2-pack of EpiPens. $300 if you're getting the generic, but it's still made by them, so I don't even understand how it's generic. But insanely expensive for a drug that's ultimately cheap. It's ultimately a cheap drug, epinephrine. So why is it so expensive for people to get this life-saving medication? Well, that's because Milan has ensured that nobody else can get on the market. Nobody else can offer the same drug for a cheaper price because they have essentially paid off the FDA and other government agencies, but the FDA primarily, to ensure that it stays that way. Which, by the way, I'm sure is illegal. I mean, I'm sure it's somehow illegal, and I'm also sure there's some loophole that they also paid some politician to throw in some omnibus bill that nobody read. I'm very pessimistic. Can you tell I'm recording this in a pessimistic mood? But yes, audit the FDA. Allow drugs that have been approved by other reliable countries to be streamlined into the American market. Allow competitive companies to put their rival drugs to these really expensive ones like epinephrine and insulin, or the same drug, but by a rival company that would be cheaper, so that there can be competition. I mean, countries like other countries around the world have the same drugs as us for much cheaper prices. Why is that the case? Why can't we buy drugs from them? Why can't we buy drugs from other countries? Well, because the government has put its foot in there, because the government works with pharmaceutical companies. Because pharmaceutical companies can pay off politicians and get them votes, because ultimately the money translates into votes, right? So they can get the politicians power, and then in return, politicians make sure that these few drug companies are the only ones who are able to sell life-saving drugs, and then they jack up the price. It's bribery with extra steps. That's what it is. It's bribery with so many steps that it's not legally considered bribery, but it is bribery, and we should tell it like it is. It's bribery. Another thing we could do is allow insurance to be purchased across state lines. Same idea. It's the same idea. Unless you're getting it through your employer, you cannot purchase insurance offered in another state if you live in America. Why is that? Well, because insurance companies, like drug companies, are extremely involved in the government, and they made it that way. You can't buy insurance from Wisconsin, because then there would be more competition. If you're a Minnesotan, I'm a Minnesotan. You can't buy insurance from Wisconsin, because that would mean there is more competition for Minnesota-based insurance companies. And if there's more competition for Minnesota-based insurance companies, they're going to have to lower their prices, and that's less money for them. You can't have that. Can't have less money for them. Less money for the big companies. Because that would be horrible. Who would have the money then? The people? Fuck. That's supposed to be sarcasm again. Insurance across state lines is another way to drive down costs. Also, I was talking a lot about cutting Medicare and Medicaid, because ultimately they're failed programs. But if you want to just, taking my what I've talked about for balancing the budget, putting it aside, if you want to just talk about Medicare and Medicaid, with the amount of money we spend on those two programs, if we were to assume that the solution to the healthcare problem, the problem of insanely expensive healthcare in America, was government, if government was the solution, we're already spending enough to insure everyone who's uninsured. Honestly, it's kind of miraculous to me that there's still uninsured people, considering how much the government already spends on this. Not how much we as a country spend on healthcare, but how much the government alone spends on healthcare. I was trying to find an average insurance cost in the United States for this year podcast. I couldn't, because there's so many different ways of measuring it, because it varies so much state by state. But I found, based on a bunch of different sources, and you can contact me if you got different numbers. If you find different numbers than what I'm saying on anything, show me a source. I'd love to correct things. But what I found is that for an individual, it costs about $350 to $450 a month for a private insurance plan. Now, there's a lot of things that muddy that up. It's different if you get it through your employer. It's different for a family plan. It's different state by state. Wyoming has insanely more expensive insurance than, Minnesota. Wyoming has way more expensive insurance than Minnesota. But on average, it's about $350 to $450 a month for insurance in America, broadly. But it's so hard, because it's so different state by state. And if you're a smoker, and if you have health conditions, and those are all things that it's fair to factor in, because ultimately that's going to determine your healthcare costs. But we spend over $1 trillion every year on medical, right? Medicare and Medicaid. So the healthcare system in America, and the federal healthcare system, That's not even including the state healthcare systems. They've all got their own spending on this stuff too. I didn't even think of that before I started talking about it. But the federal spending on healthcare is about $1 trillion a year. So insurance plan, what you could do is you could give about $255 a month to every American with that money. Or about $320 for every adult. I mean, depending on how many adults live in America, which is something I also had a little bit of trouble finding for some reason. How many adults compared to actual just citizens. But you give about $320 a month to every adult in America. Now, if insurance plans are costing $350 to $450 a month for the average American, and I get that it varies place by place, but you could insure, assuming that it's $450 a month, 185 million Americans, or assuming it's $350 a month, 240 million Americans. With the amount of money we're already spending on this. So, why then is it that there are still uninsured Americans? Why is there a single uninsured American? What I say we should do is we should take this, assuming that we don't already transfer Medicare to the states or cut Medicaid because of the negative income tax, because both of those would go away with my other plans for balancing the budget. But assuming we started with healthcare, if we took that $1 trillion, we could simply distribute it. I hate redistributionism, so it hurts me to say it. But I'm just talking about ways we can fix the current welfare state we already have. I'm not talking about getting rid of the welfare state, which would ultimately be the best plan. But if we're going to do it, we may as well do it right. You could distribute that in a fashion similar to the negative income tax, based on income, where you get less and less money the more money you make. So we're not giving money out to, someone making $200,000 a year who's got insurance through their job, But you could divvy that insurance money out to people and make sure that nobody's uninsured. I mean, with the amount of money we're spending on it, you could make sure that nobody's uninsured. And yet we don't do that. It baffles me. It baffles me how easy these things are. I mean, good God, man. Good God. But again, if you were to just try to insure everybody who's uninsured, that's still increasing demand, and in the long run, that's going to drive up prices of insurance, so it's not going to be $1 trillion a year anymore. I understand that, which is another reason why I think that it should be... I think that money that we're currently spending on medical would be better appropriated to a hefty negative income tax, so that the demand increase isn't isolated to the insurance and healthcare industry. If it was just cash in people's pockets that could be used for healthcare, the demand increase wouldn't be up so much. Increasing demand can be a good thing, but it's only a good thing with an increase in supply. And if you're keeping supply the same, which is what you're doing when you're just giving people cash to buy stuff, but you're not actually increasing the amount of stuff there is to buy, keeping demand stagnant, if you're keeping supply stagnant and increasing demand, you're gonna wanna have as little long-term damage done to the pricing of these products, goods and services as possible. And I think the negative income tax is the best way to do it. And essentially, if somebody is getting enough money to pay for an insurance plan for themselves or their family, and they choose not to with that money, they choose to do something else, then it's almost as if, well, that was their decision. If we can make sure that they have the money to do it no matter what, a guaranteed minimum income, which is what the negative income tax essentially is, then it's almost like you wouldn't have this slight bad feeling, even though it is stealing from person A and giving to person B. You wouldn't have this slight bad feeling of letting person B suffer. Because, hey, we gave you enough money to buy your own insurance policy, and now you're not doing it. Whose fault is that? Anyway, this was a little rambly. Was a little all over the place. A lot of tangents. A lot of digressions. But it was fun. Glad I recorded it. First episode. It's been 45 minutes. I'm trying to keep it about 45 minutes. That seems right. This was A House Divided with Reese Herrmann. July 17th, 2020. Just like I said at the beginning. Stay sexy. And tell me how I can improve what I'm doing to make it more entertaining for you. Goodbye.